I'm super excited to give you a glimpse into something that happened inside of my community recently. As part of a members only benefit, I did a live session where I walked through a member's website. He sent it to me and told me he was having some challenges on how to execute that in GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. I thought it was a great use case. So during one of our weekly live sessions, we actually worked on that together with a couple of other members. We ran into some really interesting challenges and it was surprisingly difficult to build. It's one of those things that you look at and once you get into it, you realize there are various different challenges just based on the layout. So this video is a post recording that I did after the fact to make things kind of optimized and clean. But in the future, these live build sessions will be taking place on a regular basis inside the community. So if you want to learn more, you can find the link in the description below. Your membership includes all of the weekly content, the discussion areas, and all of my current and future courses. So it's a really good value. Also, as a members only benefit, I'm giving access to the staging site I'm about to show you, which has a number of things prepped in terms of media library items and global colors and things like that. So you can build what we're about to see on your own and really practice your skills using GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks on a site that eventually will live in the real world. Let's go ahead and jump into the video. All right, so jumping right in, like I mentioned, I already have this staging site set up and it's got a couple of things just for the sake of time, like a menu. And then in the back end, we have some posts that were just examples that Roy from the group had on his site. So we can build out a query loop later on. Then we have the media library items, and uploaded is mainly just the 2 logo files and then a couple of things for the sidebar. We also have the example layout we're going to build here in just a second. And then a couple of other things like under appearance and GeneratePress. I've enabled all the various things we're going to need. So you can see the GeneratePress modules. For the elements area, we're going to go ahead and create things like a top bar and a couple of things like that. And then for our plugins, we have the stuff we're going to need for this particular site build, GenerateBlocks and GenerateBlocks Pro, as well as GP Premium for all the extra benefits that come with that as far as the GeneratePress theme is concerned. Then on the appearance theme side, I've gone ahead and installed our GeneratePress child theme because we'll need to do just a little bit of CSS related to the logo that I'll show you in just a moment. Then of course, I just have normal stuff like the permalink set to post name, and that's about it for this particular site. Now, of course, this is a staging site. This particular one is not going to see the life of day, but Roy will build this site out himself. Okay, so first things first, I'm gonna open the media library here, and let's just go ahead and open this in a new tab so we can see it a bit better. So here's the general concept. We have the background image, which is essentially this nice sandy beach, because Roy is a beach photographer, and the concept of this website is that everything he does right now is inside Facebook, but he wants better control of that to publish through his own website. So these blog posts are going to be things like the ability for people to buy prints. As you click through, there'll be a dynamic buy this print button that links to a third-party source. Then we have this sidebar over here with the About Us information and then a contact form. In this case, we're not going to actually incorporate the contact form, but we will build out the sidebar as well. So this section here on the left is a GenerateBlocks query loop. We have our menu here, and this particular setup was something that we ran into in the live session last week that was extremely difficult to build because of kind of this overlap with the logo here, and just making sure that it stayed responsive. It was using the GeneratePress navigation system for accessibility purposes. It turned out to be quite a bit more difficult than it looks. So our compromise here is essentially just to make sure that this kind of falls beneath the logo, and then we'll center it so that it just kind of fits more nicely in this section here. So what we're going to do is use a top bar hook to add this content up here. Then we're going to add an after logo hook for this particular image because these are actually 2 separate files and we want to make sure that we have the overlap using just a little bit of CSS on the top and bottom. Then we're going to have a content template that will handle this particular section here as well as this sidebar on the right. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just jump right in. The first thing that I want to do is just go ahead and come back over here to our appearance and then GeneratePress. And there's a function down here that you definitely need to be aware of, and that is the ability to import and export settings. So you can either do the entire customizer settings, or if you have a site that has global colors and typography you want to reuse, you can export those individually. So I did go ahead and export the global colors from that other site that we used. So I'll just drop those in real quick. It's just a little JSON file. So we upload that, click on import. It's going to make sure you want to overwrite any existing styles. Click on OK, and it says settings imported. So that just saves us a couple of moments, and I'll show you what that looks like. Now let's jump into the customizer here. So what we just did was import the global colors, and these are pretty simple. We just have a white, we have our primary 1 through 4, and then we have this just kind of like teal accent color here. So really what we need to do before anything is come back. We're going to go to background images, Under body, we're going to go ahead and grab that sandy beach photo, which is this one here. And right away, we can already see that we're a whole lot closer to the desired effect, which is having that background color across the whole site. Now, there's a couple of things happening here because we haven't created a full width layout yet. We still have this container here in the center of our page. And there's actually a sidebar here. There's just nothing in it, so you can't see it. Then of course, our header and our footer by default have a white background color. So that's why we're not able to see through those just yet. So if we were to come back over here to our color system, we could come up here to the header and we can just change this background to something like transparent. And then we can see through the header on top of that background image, which is exactly what we want. Now, in terms of the footer itself, normally I would use a GeneratePress element to manually create the footer, but in this particular demo, I don't actually have a footer as part of that graphic that Roy sent me. So we'll probably just go ahead and make the footer bar transparent and we'll just leave it that copyright 2025. Okay, so we're already making progress. Let's go ahead and publish this. We'll go back a step to site identity. We're gonna hide this site title, and for our logo, we're gonna use this picture right here. Now this does differ slightly from that example because there's no white border on it, but that's okay. This will act as our site logo, and this logo width, we're gonna set to something like 350 pixels. Then what we're gonna do is come back a step. We're gonna go to our layout. Then we'll go to header, and for our header presets, we're gonna go with navigation after. And then we need to do one other thing. So come back a step, go to primary navigation, and then in this navigation alignment, we're gonna set this to center. So Roy told us that there will probably never be more menu links than this. So we're okay with the way this is gonna be positioned because we're just about to use some negative margin. And then this image will kind of overlap this nav area. And of course, it will also overlap this blue area when we create that in just a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and publish this. And what I want to do now is go back out of the customizer. That's everything we need to do for now. We're going to come back in there, of course. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and create my first GeneratePress element. So this is going to be a block type element. We'll just call this one like top bar, or if you're using this as like a notification system like I teach in my course, you could call this site-wide notification bar, whatever you want. The main thing we want to do is come in here and drop in a GenerateBlocks container. And what I'll do is just open my sidebar so you can see what I'm doing here. I'll drop in another container, and then I already have a global style on my website called contained. And all this really does is basically just come in here. It sets the sizing to our global max width of 1200 pixels. And then in our spacing, it's going to set the margin to left, right, auto. These are all part of the global style framework that is included in the Generate Made Easy 2.0 course, which as an all access member, of course, you have access to. Okay, and then the other thing I like to do, I want to go ahead and add my pad1 class, which is just one rim of padding on the top and bottom of that container. And then on the outermost container here, I'm going to set the background color. So come to the styles tab. We'll go to background, and then the background color will be our teal global color like this. And then in this case, we're just going to set the typography on this individual element to white on the container. So it just kind of cascades down. Then inside of here, we'll drop in a GenerateBlocks text element. And this says site launch special 20% off coupon. Then this part of the little notice here is bold, so we can just do that. And for a little bit more flexibility, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this little text element in a container, because underneath that, we're also going to have some social icons. So I'll just use the stock WordPress social icon block, which isn't the most elegant thing ever, but for the sake of example, it will give us some elements here to work with. So I'll just drop in 3 of these. Don't need 2 Amazons. And then what I need to do here is just click on the element and actually make it a link. So I'll just send all these to Google for example's sake. And that means that the element will actually appear in our front end preview. If you don't add a link, you can see it in the back end, but it won't show up on the front end. So then from here, I have some global styles like our flex row. Then I could do something like my align center class, and that's going to just basically set the align items to center like this. And then from here, what I would probably do is something like on this container, I would set its sizing to maybe something like 90%, so it takes up most of that container. In this case, that's probably not quite what we want. Let's go back to 80 so everything fits. And then we're just going to take our text and we're going to align it to the right like this. And that's because it's going to overlap the image if we don't do that. Now, by default, GeneratePress has some default spacing on the bottom of text elements. So if we look here, it doesn't show, but if I zero this out, then you can see that margin is removed. And what I do is just on my starter site, I use a little bit of CSS to remove this if it's the last element in its containers. So that's part of the reason why on this text element, I wrapped it in this container, because otherwise if these were side by side, it wouldn't actually be the last element in its parent container. In this case though, just zeroing it out is fine, especially on a site like this that's so small and on a global element where you just need to come change this once. Now from here, what we need to do is set our display rules. So this display rule is going to be entire site in this case, because we want this bar to appear on all posts and pages. Then we'll use the element type of hook, and we'll just do something like before header. And now we can go ahead and publish this top bar. Let's go ahead and take a look on the front end of our website, and there is that bar. Looks like we have some alignment issues here. And that's actually coming from a GeneratePress setting here, which is to do with default margin on UL items. We can see that it's margin bottom of 1.5 rem, so it's adding that to each of the individual elements. The easiest way to go ahead and get rid of that would probably be to just come into our appearance and then go to customize. Under our additional CSS, we'll just do UL, and then something like margin bottom can just be unset. All right, and then we need to publish that, so we save this change, and then we need to add a little bit of spacing between these elements. So back here in our top bar, what I'm gonna do is come to this outer container, and then on the block, I'm just going to add another global style of something like gap1. We can save this, and then let's go take a look on the front end, and there is our spacing and our little margin fix, so that's perfect. Of course, this isn't exactly like the example here. This has a larger font size and more spacing, but you get the idea. I just want to show you how these different functions are going to work rather than focusing on the intricacies of every single piece of this design. Okay, so at this point, we're going to go back to our GeneratePress elements and we'll create another one. And this again is going to be the type of block. And this element is going to contain this logo right here. So technically you could have this all as part of one image with just some additional spacing, but then you're going to have some weird overlapping effects. And we just want control over how this particular image is going to be positioned. So what we'll do in this case is we're just going to call this something like hook after main logo. And then in this case, I want to drop in a container to wrap that image, and I'll just drop in the GenerateBlocks image element, which is this blue one. I'll go ahead and pick that image from our media library here, and it's quite big by default. So what I want to do is on this container, I'm going to come back over here, and on the sizing, I'm going to set a max width of like 600 pixels. And then from here on the container, to get it positioned in the center, I'm going to again use margin left and right auto. Then we'll do the display rule of entire site. And this hook is actually going to be after logo, which is part of the reason why I named this element after logo, so it's nice and clear. We'll publish this, refresh, and there is our logo. Now this does differ slightly. The one in the example has white text here on the bottom. Again, you get the idea. All right, so we're making really good progress here. The next thing to do would be to go ahead and use some negative margin on the top and bottom of this logo to pull that up and then bring it over the top of the menu here. So what I'll do is, again, in the customizer, I'll come back here, and I just happen to know that the class we need is site logo. So I'll do margin top something like -3 rem just to test. That looks pretty good. And then we'll again just do the same thing, margin bottom -3 rem to pull that over. Now this is part of the reason why I centered the navigation here so that it would overlap nicely. We'll just go ahead and publish that, refresh, and that's essentially what we need. I don't think I specifically mentioned it yet, but these links right here are just coming from the default WordPress menu that I already created. These are just custom links. They don't actually go to anything, but I just wanted to make sure that there was something in that default GeneratePress navigation system. Now again, this is another area where this particular site we're building is going to differ from this mockup. It's so easy in tools like Figma and Photoshop to position everything perfectly here, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it on a website, it turns out to be so much more difficult. The reason why this is so difficult here is because you need to find a way to push the navigation all the way to the right in this container, and then also have it behave nicely on mobile. And you want to make sure that you're not just dropping links in that act as your navigation, because for screen reader users and accessibility purposes, you want to rely on things like the stock GeneratePress navigation or other navigation plugins that are known to be accessible. So we don't just want to build this, although technically you could do that. We spent way too long on that in the live session last week, and even with some really talented people, it was quite difficult. So we're just not going to worry about that. And in this particular instance, Roy was totally okay with this particular concession. At this point, what we want to do is go ahead and add in this sandy beach color in the background, but to do that, we want to go ahead and create another GeneratePress element that kind of acts as our content controller. So we have more control over this part of the website here. And normally what I would do is, as a GeneratePress element, I would come in here to our layout, and then I would call this something like full width layout. But in this case, we don't actually want our layout to be full width. So we're just going to call this our layout. We're going to do a sidebar content, no sidebar, which is a little confusing. And that's because I actually want to control this sidebar as an element. And then that way I can build it out with GeneratePress elements using that same element system we've already been looking at a bunch now. I'm not forced to do it in widgets. Technically, you can do that if you prefer. You can leave this sidebar layout to just default, but I think it's better to just build it out yourself. So content, no sidebars is what we're gonna do. Footer, we don't need to touch. And disable elements, what we're gonna do is featured image and content title. Then for our content area, we're going to leave this to default. Again, we don't want this to be full width like I normally do. Default is good. Then our display roles is going to be entire site. Let's go ahead and publish this. And now we're going to see this white box disappear as well as the word home there. So let's refresh. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. The white box itself is, technically still on the page, but now the content area is this full width. And this is just a background color coming from our customizer. So let's come back into the customizer and refresh. Then what we can do is on our colors, we're going to come to content, and we're just going to set this background to something like this primary 2. We'll go to like 65%, and that is pretty much exactly what we want. Now you can see this background color doesn't go through the header area up here like we want it to, like it does in the example. And that's because we set the sandy, background image itself on the body tag. So if we come here to the body background color and we just drop in that same, 65%, we're going to see nothing happen here. That's because that background image takes precedent. So we're just going to zero that out. We're not going to work with the body background tag. We're just going to take this same color and come up here to our header background and drop that in. All right, so let's go ahead and publish this, refresh on the front end, and we are definitely making progress here. A couple of things for us to fix. We want to make sure this header does not extend to the full width, which is a GeneratePress customizer setting. And then also, this is kind of a personal decision for you or Roy or whoever's building a site like this. When you have a design that turns out to be kind of complicated like this menu, the question is, what do you want to do with the menu? Do you want to leave it with a white background and just have some dark text like that? Or perhaps you could even do something like change it to be that same sandy color and make the text white. So just for example's sake, let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to our primary navigation background, set that same color like this. Then our navigation text will be white. And let's suppose that our hover and accent colors are going to be something like maybe one of these others. Let's see, I'd have to check accessibility on these. That definitely won't work. There's actually a tool I really love. I call it Paleton. And basically what it allows you to do is drop in a base RGB color down here, and it will give you a bunch of different versions of that color. So let's just drop in this one. So I'll drop in this here. There we go, paste and click OK. And then you can choose whether you want it to be whatever these are called. I think like adjacent, monochromatic, triad, whatever these colors are called. I am not a designer, so I just use this and I take what looks the best. In this case, maybe this like seafoam green would kind of work. Again, we still need to check the color contrast of this, but let's just take a look real quick. So if we hover over this, still a bit dark, but you get the idea. You could use a tool like this if you don't already have a predefined color palette to pick something that will definitely work. Maybe even we would want something just a little bit lighter that has kind of that nice seafoam green effect. So it's still a little bit visible. No, even that's too much. Perhaps we would want it to be like the darkest version of this color. Again, I've said it already, but I would want to check the color contrast to make sure all of this is good. So this is all starting to look pretty good. Now let's go ahead and come back to our layout and our header, and let's change this header width from full to contained. And then we need to go do the same for our primary navigation. So navigation width will also be contained. And now everything is starting to fit in that nice box layout, just like our example site. So from here, the final thing we need to address before we actually go build the content and generate blocks is this little gap right here. And this is connected to the fact that in our layout element, we didn't use this full width, no padding. What that essentially does is in the customizer, if we come back to the container section, this content padding is the actual area inside this site main selector here. And so if I zeroed out the top padding, you can see it kind of goes away, the top and bottom, but that doesn't remove that spacing there. In this container section, it's this separating space. So if we reduce this down to 0, then you can see that it's going to bring that container up and down exactly as what we need. Whereas normally if we go with the full width no padding option, essentially all of these controls right here more or less do nothing, except container width is still valuable, but separating space, content separator, and so on basically do nothing. So in this case, we could take our separating space down to 0. Then our content padding, there's actually 40 pixels top and bottom in this site main tag here that we can't see. So you might want to control that with GenerateBlocks instead, but we could also just leave it as a global option here. Then the other thing is that our image here maybe perhaps is a little bit further to the left to match our content area. So what we could do is come back over here, and on the header option, you do have this header padding left and right. So it is 40 left and right. It is going to match in this case. But let's suppose you wanted 24 pixels left and right. Then in our container, we could just change this to 24 left and right. That'll probably look pretty good. All right, so now we have essentially the entire header built out. So this is basically all using GeneratePress functions and the elements, which is super cool. And I'm actually just wanting to explore real quick, if we change that primary navigation color back to white, is that actually better? Of course, we can't see our text now, so maybe we could take this seafoam green just as an example. I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of that background being pure white. I mean, I think you could do something interesting with this to make it stand out a little bit and just like clearly be the navigation. Even though it's slightly transparent white might actually do the trick. That's something for designers who are a whole lot more talented than me, but I actually do like the fact that this now kind of breaks up the page a little bit, and you can kind of clearly see like this is the header and then this is the content area. All right, so let's go ahead and build out some page content. Once again, we're going to create another GeneratePress element, and what I'm going to do is use this as a block. We're going to call this content container. And you'll notice that our background has become that kind of solid sandy color, and that comes from the fact that we set our content background here to this color. Just for example, if we set it back to white, save and refresh, I'll just quickly refresh this, you can see that that's white. So that background color is coming from this content background color here in GeneratePress global color settings, which I actually love. It makes it really cohesive, makes the back end match the front end in a lot of cases. Back to the element though, and this content container, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and drop in a container. Then what I'll do is, of course, open my sidebar and drop in another container. And normally what I would do is I would drop in this class called contained. And basically what that does is it sets our global max width. And actually, to make this easier, let's jump back to the backend real quick. Generate blocks and global styles, and we can look at this global style and see what properties it has set. So on this contained class, all I'm doing is using margin left and right auto, and I'm setting the max width of that container to our global max width, which of course comes from the GeneratePress customizer. But in this case, I don't actually need that class because we're not using a full width layout element, and it's going to be restricted to our content width anyway. So instead, what I'm going to do is just on this inner container, I'm going to remove the contain class, and I'm going to drop in the other class I use called main container. All this one does is essentially it adds some padding, so 1.5 rem on all sides, and then if we go down to tablet and mobile, we could shrink that down to something like 1 rem to make it fit a bit better. We'll jump back up to desktop and come back. And then what I want to do is actually add in 2 more containers, and this will make sense in just a moment. Let's go ahead and rename these containers for clarity. So we'll rename this one, and I'll just call this one grid. And this one will just be our content area. And then on the right, it will just be sidebar. So now what I'm going to do is on this container, I'm going to drop in a global style that is basically just going to be like a grid 3-1. This is the naming convention that I use to basically indicate to myself, this is going to take up 3/4 of the available space, and the other column is going to take up the 1/4 of remaining space. We'll click on create, go to blank style, layout will be a display of grid, and then our grid layout here, we can just use one of the defaults, which is essentially just this, but I want to reverse it. So 3FR and 1FR. So now we can see we have our content area and our sidebar. Then back on this grid container, I have the grid class, and I'm going to go ahead and drop in a gap class. Just 1 rem for now is going to be totally fine. I forgot to go ahead and refresh this page so that we can see the proper background color here. So I actually just realized I made a little bit of a mistake here. So on this site, I had this existing main container class and it has a background color of white. And in this case, we actually don't want that. And the reason why, of course, is because we want this leftmost, our content area, to have that white background and our right to be kind of transparent. So we'll come back here to our element. And on the content area, we'll go ahead and just set that one's background to white. Now what we can do in this case is we can drop our pad 1 card class, and this is just 1 rim of padding on all sides. So our spacing here will just be 1 rim. We'll connect all that together. And so now when we go ahead and drop in content, there will be always 1 rim on all sides. Now at this point, we can drop in an element called dynamic content, and this will just be our post content like this. Now to see this, let's go ahead and change our element to the element type of content template, and then it's going to do something kind of annoying here, which has, for some reason, I don't know why, 840 pixels of width by default. We'll set that to 100%, and then we'll set this to the location of entire site. So now when we save this, we can go refresh on the front end. And then I actually forgot to do 2 things here. So if we take a look at this HTML, we can see that what's happened is we have a main wrapper, which is generally the tag you use for the whole kind of content area of your site. Then it applies this article and some other stuff, which kind of loses the background color we set in GeneratePress Customizer. So all we have to do there is just come back to our element, change this tag name from article to div, and then we want to come down here to keep default post container. So when we save that and refresh on the front end, you can see, of course, that is more representative of what we actually want. So the trade-off here that I wanted to bring up is that with this content container element, we're able to build the content area and then this sidebar in this template. Then when we go to our homepage, we just build out the content and it's automatically going to fit it in this left, 3/4 column, and we'll have the sidebar all in that one area. Now, the trade-off being that when we look at this area in the homepage, we're not actually going to pick up that content background color, unfortunately. And not only that, but you're not going to see it fit properly. So if we open this sidebar, you could be building a layout kind of in this available space that would fit until you go on the front end, and then you may run into layout conflicts. So the advantages of doing this content container approach would be that everything is kind of contained in one template. So you're able to come back to this one place. And if, let's just say, for example, you wanted to kind of swap this sidebar, you can do that. Change the styling of the content area, add border radius, whatever you want. You can do it from this one central location. A better example would be if you wanted to do something that actually changed the HTML of this template, essentially. And really, this element should probably be called something like content template, so we can save that. The advantage of doing this approach primarily would be that you wouldn't have to create a sidebar in an element or use widgets and hook it in various places around the site. You kind of have one central location, and then you get all the GenerateBlocks styling controls, and for things that work in the block editor like block visibility, you could manage all of that from one central location. Again, there's trade-offs both ways. So with those considerations in mind, we really are ready to go ahead and build out the content area on the homepage, and this is a query loop. So with those kind of caveats in mind, I will go ahead and edit our homepage here. And I'm going to go ahead and just drop in a query loop. In this case, I'm not going to wrap it in a container because I'm going to let that content template do the heavy lifting here. So I want to make sure to drop in the GenerateBlocks query element, which is this one here. And I'm actually going to start blank on this. So let's expand this, and if we look at the query element, we can see that its query type is set to post automatically, and the post type is post, which is exactly what we want. Again, on this site, I only have 2 posts, but we can see those 2 right here, and they just have a simple little description, and they have the featured image set, which is exactly what we want. So from this point, what we're going to do is just drop in a little container. This one I will just rename as like our, author meta. And then inside of this, I'm going to drop in a container and duplicate that. You'll see why in just a moment. In this leftmost container, I'm going to drop in a GenerateBlocks image element. And from the image source dynamic tag, what I'll do is just find the author avatar URL. Now this is going to pull from the Gravatar, so it's actually going to have my image because of course I'm the one logged into the site and I'm the author of those posts. So it's not going to match Roy's photo right here, but you get the idea. So we'll go ahead and just drop this in. There's my little image, and what I could do is on the image, I'll just go to a border radius and set this to 100%, make it a nice little circle, and it looks a bit smaller, so either we could edit the dynamic tag, come back over here to the settings panel, we can just go back to the dynamic tags button, change this avatar size from something like 96 to maybe, I don't know, something like 50 pixels. There we go, smaller, and that's all we need. So what we'll do on this author meta is drop in our flex row. We'll drop in our gap 1. And then all I'll do inside of this container is drop in a simple text element. And that actually says the author's name again, which is a little bit redundant. I guess if you really wanted to, you totally could. So what you can do is just come back in again on this GenerateBlocks text element, go to dynamic tags, and then we could go with the author meta. And in this case, the meta key might be, something like first name, last name, could be their nice name, whatever you want. We'll just do first_name and click on add. We'll drop that in, and then there's me. So what I'll do from here is duplicate that, and then we'll just change this tag to this one is the post publish date. Go ahead and just insert that. And now what we can do is actually edit this. So we can type the word published on in front of that, which matches this. Oh, actually it's published with a colon, not published on. Then what we could do is just go ahead and search for text transform here in the styles tab and make sure this is uppercase to match the mockup. And again, we have some margin bottom on this particular element. So what I'll do is either just find or search for the spacing and just set margin bottom on this to 0 to push them up. Then back on the author meta, I'm going to go to another global style, add another global style of align center. So everything is together, and it has the adverse effect of that margin bottom needing to be on both of those elements. Also, it also needs to be the typography with text transform of uppercase here as well. Then maybe let's just say, for example, you want a font weight of 700 on the name. Beautiful. All right, so now we have our author meta here. Then underneath that, what I'll do is just drop in another container. This one has the text element with the dynamic tag of post excerpt. We'll just drop that in. And then underneath that, we're going to drop in a GenerateBlocks image. And this one has the dynamic tag of post featured image. The image size, probably in this case, since it's a photography website, full will be totally sufficient. So we'll stick that in. And we are definitely starting to get somewhere. Now let's go ahead and save this, and let's take a look on the front end. And boom shakalaka, we are cooking with gas, as they say. This is starting to match our layout here really, really close. The main difference now is just the spacing between this area and the image, and also the fact that I forgot the post title because I'm a clown. So what I'll do is just go ahead and actually let's take this image out of the container there. I'll go ahead and just move this down. Then the post excerpt, let's just duplicate that, and above it, we'll just open this tag, and instead of that, we're gonna go with the post title. And then we will link this to the post itself. Insert that dynamic tag. Then let's go ahead and maybe bump that font weight up to like 1.125 rem. And we want our spacing on the margin bottom to be maybe like 0.25 rem. So there's a little bit of space, but not too much. Save that, and there we go. Now, one other thing is we can do at this point, the reason why I separated all three of these is on our loop item, I would go ahead and add a gap 1. Now this isn't going to work because this loop item is not set to any kind of flex property. So what I can do is just drop in my flex column class, and then that makes the gap work. So now we'll save, go take a look, and everything is spaced out up here really nicely. The other thing I can do is come back to the actual looper. On this, I can just also set a gap 1. Same thing is true. We want this to be flex call, and that will space it out. So now there'll be space between all of our posts. If there was another one, the same thing would apply down below it. The other thing is that we probably want to make sure our post title is a different dynamic tag instead of paragraph. We probably want this to be something like H2. And I only linked this specific heading element, and that's because I want to go ahead and on my loop item, I'm going to drop in a class called stretch link, and this makes that whole card clickable and remains totally accessible. So we'll save this. This does require a little bit of custom CSS. So if I come back over here, we're going to go to the additional CSS. I'll go ahead and drop in this CSS, and what that's going to do is just automatically stretch that A link over the whole card for us, and it also works in focus states as well. So now when we refresh, you can see I can only click on this part of the post right now, but when I refresh, this whole thing is going to become clickable. So there you go. You can see that all of that is working exactly as intended. So we are basically there. The only thing left is the sidebar and then the actual single post template. At this point, the sidebar is very straightforward. I would come back into my content template and then I would just build those out using containers. So I'm going to drop in a container that's going to have, the text at the top that says about me. It's going to have a GenerateBlocks image that will have the picture of Roy and his wife. Then I would just add in another container beneath that. This one is going to be our newsletter signup container. Newsletter sign up, and then you're going to drop, like your short code here or whatever. For these text elements, we probably don't want them to be paragraphs. I would assume they're probably going to be H3s or H4s in the sidebar, depending on the rest of the content. And then again, on the sidebar, I'll go with a flex call, and then I'll go with a gap of 1 to space those out. So we can just save this, refresh, and now everywhere across the site, we're going to have that. Even if we switch to a page that has nothing on it, we're going to see this sidebar because of course that's global and whatever content is actually on that page or post will appear here. So just for example, clicking into this single post template, you can see that there's just the actual text, but our sidebar is still present there. So that's super, super cool. All right, so this video is quite long, but there's one more thing I want to show you. So in Roy's demo, if I come back to the media items here, we can look at his single post template, and this would be another GeneratePress element. But what I wanted to do is quickly just discuss this by this print button. So really all we would need to do is build our single post template using our GeneratePress elements. It's essentially just the blog that I demonstrate in Generate Made Easy version 2. So you can reference that on how to actually build it. But how would you link this button? You could add the button to the post content and manually link it, but that's a little bit clunky. And if you ever needed to go back and remove that button or change its position, you got to go do it to every post across your site. That is, of course, not ideal. So the way that I would do that is I would just use advanced custom fields free. So we would just go to plugins and add new, and we'll find advanced custom fields. We would go ahead and install this, activate that. Then under the ACF field groups, we can see what I already created, which is a field group called post fields. So I just clicked on add new. Then inside of this field group, I want to make sure that the post type is equal to post. I just used a simple text field and I called it prints URL. So this is just going to hold the link to that particular print's destination, wherever it may be, whether it's on or off this site. Then what I can do is make sure to save that change, come over to my posts, edit a post, and then down at the bottom, we have that ACF field group. You can see here, I already pasted that in. The prints URL in this just demo is google.com. Then alternatively, this other one is going to be my website, jonathanjernigan.com. And what I would do is again, just use that dynamic tag. In fact, I can show you here. So if we wanted to incorporate that in our query loop, we could just drop in a simple button. We can say buy this print. Then what we want to do is on the settings, we're going to go with link destination. Select dynamic tag will be post meta, and the meta key in this case is prints_URL. So go ahead and add that, insert, and then because we're probably taking somebody off the site, we want to go with open link in new tab. Save that, and then when we refresh our home page, we can see that now this will take us to Google, and this post will take us to my website. How cool is that? So the custom field is essentially holding that destination URL. Now, I wouldn't actually recommend setting it up this way because using that stretch link setup that we did before, you don't actually want two links on the same card like this. I just wanted to demonstrate how it works dynamically through two different posts. And since we don't yet have a single post template, it just doesn't make sense otherwise. Hopefully that makes sense though. I'm just going to go ahead and for the sake of example, delete that button, save this, and then we're back to where we left off just a moment ago. So how cool is that? We created a couple of different elements, all of which we can see here. We got our top bar, the blue hook. We got our hook for the white logo here. We have our layout, which is just restricting our content area, as you can see. And then our content template, which is handling the left white kind of 3/4 of the page, and then our right side handling the sidebar. This was a really, really fun thing to build both live because of all the challenges we faced and to do it again now, which gives me the ability to do it more efficiently, more effectively, and cover a lot of ground in whatever length this video ends up being, which I suspect will be quite long. I hope that you enjoyed this. This will be available as a full replay, including the ability to ask me questions and get help on the site as a member inside the community. So make sure if you're not already joined that you use the link in the description to get access now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the community.